In the court of the Kauravas, 500 men sat in silence, kings, elders, warriors, gods among mortals, and not one of them spoke, not one of them moved. Because in front of them all, a queen was being dragged by her hair into the open court in a torn sari and forced to kneel before the man who had just gambled her away like a coin. Her name was Draupadi, and she had a question, one question that no one in that hall could answer. That silence would cost them everything. Before we get to that court, you need to understand who Draupadi was. She was not born from a mother. She rose fully grown from a sacred fire, Yajnaseni, the daughter of flame. Her father, King Drupada, had performed this yajna with one purpose, to create a daughter who would one day bring about the destruction of the man who had humiliated him. She was, from her first breath, a weapon shaped like a woman. Beautiful beyond measure, sharp as a blade, and destined for something no woman in the Mahabharata had ever experienced before. She would marry not one man, but 5. At her swayamvar, her marriage ceremony, kings and warriors from across Bharatavarsha came to compete for her hand. The challenge: string an impossibly heavy bow and shoot a revolving fish target, looking only at its reflection in water below. One by one, the greatest warriors of the age failed. Duryodhana failed. Karna stepped forward, and Draupadi herself stopped him. She would not, she said, marry the son of a charioteer. Whether that moment was pride or fate or something the epic itself never fully explains, we cannot know. What we know is that Arjuna, disguised as a Brahmin, strung the bow, shot the fish, and Draupadi placed the garland around his neck. She had no idea she was about to become the wife of 5 men. When the Pandavas brought Draupadi home, they called out to their mother Kunti, "We have brought something wonderful." And Kunti, without looking up from her work, said, "Whatever it is, share it equally among yourselves." Those words, spoken without thought, changed Draupadi's life entirely. Because in this world, a mother's word to her sons was sacred law. And so Draupadi became the wife of all 5 Pandava brothers: Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva. Each would have her as his wife for 1 year at a time, in rotation. And in each year, she was entirely his, and the others would not look at her as a wife. For years, the Pandavas ruled Indraprastha, the kingdom they had built from a forest, and they were prosperous. But Yudhishthira, the eldest, the one who was called the embodiment of Dharma itself, had one weakness: dice. He could not refuse a challenge. And the game of dice in ancient India was not merely entertainment. It was considered a form of sacred combat. To refuse was to show cowardice. Duryodhana knew this. Shakuni, his uncle, the master of loaded dice, had spent his entire life preparing for this one moment. The invitation came. Yudhishthira could not refuse. Round after round, Yudhishthira lost. He wagered his treasury, he wagered his kingdom, he wagered his army, he wagered his brothers, one by one, and lost them all. And then, in what scholars still debate as the darkest moment in all of Indian literature, he wagered Draupadi. She was his wife. She was a queen, she was a human being, and he put her on the dice table like property, and he lost her too. Shakuni picked up the dice and smiled. The role had already been decided. Dushasana, Duryodhana's brother, went to the women's quarters. Draupadi was in her monthly retreat, wearing a single cloth. She pleaded. She was a queen. She was in a sacred state. Dushasana dragged her by her hair into the open assembly hall anyway. 500 men watched. Bhishma the patriarch, silent. Drona the teacher, silent. Vidura the wise, silent. The king Dhritarashtra, silent. Her 5 husbands, enslaved, heads bowed. Draupadi stood in that court, alone, and she asked her question. Here is the question Draupadi asked. Listen carefully, because scholars have argued about this for 2,000 years. She said, "Yudhishthira, my husband, had already lost himself in the dice. He was already a slave. Does a man who is himself enslaved have the right to wager another person? Can a slave gamble his wife?" It was a perfect legal and moral trap. If Yudhishthira was already enslaved when he wagered her, then the wager was invalid. She was never truly lost. But nobody in that court answered her. Not Bhishma, not Drona, not the king. 500 men and not one could give her an answer. That silence is the most damning thing the Mahabharata ever wrote. Dushasana grabbed her sari and began to pull. He would disrobe her in front of the entire court. Draupadi had one word left, Krishna. She called to him, not the man, not the king. She called to the divine, and the cloth did not end. However much Dushasana pulled, the sari kept coming, the hall filled with silk. Dushasana pulled until his arms gave out and he collapsed in exhaustion, and Draupadi stood, still clothed, still standing. In that moment, she raised her free hand and she swore she would not tie her hair. She would not act as a wife. She would live in dishevelment until she could wash her unbound hair in the blood of the man who had dragged her here. Dhritarashtra, terrified by what he had witnessed, granted Draupadi 3 boons. She asked for the freedom of her husbands and their weapons. Nothing more. No gold, no vengeance yet. The Pandavas were sent into 13 years of forest exile under the terms of a second rigged dice game. For 13 years, Draupadi walked with them, ate what they ate, slept where they slept. And when the men grew tired, when Yudhishthira spoke of acceptance and patience, it was Draupadi who reminded them what had been done. She was the ember that kept their anger alive for 13 years. The war of Kurukshetra lasted 18 days. 166 million men died, and on the final day, Bhima found Dushasana on the battlefield. He remembered the vow, he killed him, and he brought Draupadi the blood she had been waiting 13 years for. She washed her hair, she tied it. Just like that. No dramatic speech, no celebration, just a woman fulfilling a promise she had made to herself in the worst moment of her life. That quiet act, that single gesture of a woman tying her hair, is one of the most powerful moments in any mythology I have ever encountered. Here is the question the Mahabharata leaves with us. Was Draupadi's wrath dharma or adharma? She sought justice and she got it, but 166 million people died in the process. Was her curse the cause, or was it the 500 men in that court who chose silence? Was it Yudhishthira's weakness? Was it Shakuni's design? Or was it fate, a war that was always going to happen, and Draupadi merely the last domino? The Mahabharata does not answer this. That's the genius of it. It makes you carry the weight. So I want to know, do you think the war was her fault? Drop your answer below. And if you want to see the story of another person the Mahabharata treated with equal injustice, Eklavya, the self-taught archer who was asked to give up his thumb, that story drops next week. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm your narrator at Story Archive, and I'll see you then.